welcome. I'm Rabbi Rob Steinberg. So good to see everyone, people I know, people I'm looking forward to meeting. And we like to start these brunches with a song taken from our synagogue choir's repertoire that is in some way related to the topic. And often it's something in Hebrew and drawn directly from Jewish tradition. In this case, it wasn't, as you probably saw. That I wouldn't be
who come off and know that the choir always sings something that's related to what our speaker is talking about, but usually it's in Hebrew and the speakers have no idea what it's all about. Today I looked over and I saw Sara she just had this great look on her face, like, oh my gosh, they're singing to me. So that's great. First of all, thanks to the folks who helped set up, as always, Debbie and Tammy, and Michelle and Avi, and Lizzie, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. And thanks to the people who helped set up all these tables. And why don't we just dive right into it? We have Dr. Sara Glass with us. She grew up in the Gur Hasidic movement, and she's going to tell us how she went from being little Makala to being Dr. Sara Glass. All right, so can everybody hear? Is this good?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
How's this audio on this end? No.
We'll get there.
How is this now?
Okay.
Perfect.
So hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. That was beautiful. My daughter's here with me today, and we've been on such a journey to get here. We just couldn't believe that there's a synagogue in which a song like this is being sung. And I can't wait to dive more into it.
So you have had quite a journey to get here, and I read your book, and I was telling Liz, my wife, I said, I'm reading this book and I want to go back to the younger version of this author and give her a hug constantly, right? Because it's been traumatic and crazy. So I think the best way to do this is let's tell your story in an arc, and then we'll dive back into certain pieces of it. So can you tell us a little bit about growing up in your community, and more specifically in your family?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I was raised in Hasidic Brooklyn, and it was essentially the opposite of that song. So let's talk about that a little bit. I was raised in a household with no access to media, no TV. I was born in the 1980s, but we had no outside magazines. Our whole household had like Talmud books and Jewish books. And so what that meant was that everything I was taught at school was reinforced at home, and all I knew was that I was supposed to get married to a man and have many children. I had older sisters, and I watched them get married one by one. At 18 or 19, which was like old, they would just get married off to a man they had met a couple of times. And I was also taught what would happen if I deviated from that path. Like, as a young child, some of the stories I learned were, there's this one about the girl who wore a skirt that was too short. And her punishment was, in the afterlife, to be dragged around by a horse and buggy and have her skirt pinned into her calves with long pins until her flesh tore. And that would be the punishment for wearing a short skirt. So you can imagine, like, me as a young child learning this, I thought, okay, I am not going to hell. That sounds horrific. I'll just do exactly whatever I'm told to do. And so I really, really tried pretty hard to do that, but there were some challenges along the way for me.
There aren't a lot of talks about sexuality when you're growing up, but at some point in your teenage years, you find yourself attracted to a woman in the community. Can you tell us a bit about that relationship and how it started, how it ended, and then we'll get into your marriage?
Absolutely. So we're in this community where it's exactly like, has anyone seen the documentaries with like the men in the fur hats and the long black coats? You know, if you've driven by Brooklyn, you may have seen it. It feels like another world, even though it's just a few miles from here. I can't believe how far it feels now. And so I was in like a base after high school in a long skirt, and a button-down shirt, and I started to have feelings for this other girl in my 10th grade class. I just thought she was so fascinating. I wanted to talk with her all the time. And we started a secret relationship where we would hook up, essentially. We didn't know what that was called, we just knew we wanted to touch each other, but we never talked about it, not once. We would just find these ways to have sleepovers, and I would wake up and fast the following day and pray. And I would just beg God to take it away from me and to just make me not want that anymore, because I wanted so badly to just be like everybody else.
You know, you did it, but I'm curious about this. You write that in high school, you started to bring books home from the local library.
Yeah.
So was that part of this feeling slightly different? I'm attracted to this woman, maybe I need to, what compels you to go to the library, which I'm certain you're not supposed to do, and bring home these books that you're not supposed to be bringing home?
So I was always a little bit of a rebel. Like in 8th grade, I got in trouble for wearing thigh-high socks instead of stockings. I secretly painted my toenails at sleepovers. I wasn't supposed to. And I was so curious. I'm such a curious person. I wanted to know more about the world. And so I did sneak out to the library. And for 25 cents, you could get a Brooklyn Public Library bag. But it said Brooklyn Public Library, so I would turn it inside out. So nobody from my community would know that the books inside the bag were not Jewish books. And then like kind of hide it under my coat and walk the 5 blocks from 60th Street to 55th Street in Borough Park with my secret Animorphs and Sweet Valley High hidden in the bag. And I don't, you know, at that time there was not enough queer representation even in secular books. And so that's why representation is so important, and banned books are so important. Those are the books that tell us who we think, like who we can be, and give us the ability to think outside of the boxes that we might be in. So I didn't even have that from books, you know, but I did have some idea that there could be a world outside. Even if it was forbidden to me, at least I could think about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously when you're walking around the streets of Brooklyn, you see lots of people who are not Hasids.
Yeah.
Right? And so what did you think about those people as you were walking about?
I thought that they were unlucky. I felt like I was taught to feel bad for them.
Mm.
And I still say them, like that's me now, but I thought, oh, you know, me now, like they didn't know. They didn't know that God was the true God, and they didn't know how to follow his will.
Mm.
And so I just had pity.
So you're in high school, and when you graduate, of course, it's time to get married. So I guess you just went out and you looked for the best looking guy you could find and got married, right?
So I did do a year, I think what I now call wife school, which is like post-high school seminary in Israel, where like half of the classes were about how to be a good wife, and the other half were about studying text and Jewish history. So we learned things like, don't pressure your husband to go to shul, to synagogue. Just encourage him gently, and if he doesn't go, it's your job to make it enticing for him. Things like that. You know, when you sweep the corners of your home, you should feel like you're cleaning the holy temple. And my kids always say, you failed wife school. Failed it multiple times.
A duvet cover on the
I do not put, yeah, she's like, I'm glad you can put my duvet cover on. I did learn that in wife school. But yes, thank you, Jordan. She's like, you still can't cook. And then I got set up with this, like, with a man who was older than I was, actually. He was 26 and I was 19. But what happened was I was considered like inferior quality in the marketplace at 19 because my family had a history of mental illness. And my parents were not, they were like kind of separated and having problems. And so that brought down my value on that marriage market. And so I was set up with a man who was 26 years old and had a hard time finding a match. And so they said, perfect, he's older, she has family problems, this is a good match. And we met a few times, 6 times to be exact. And then he proposed and I said yes.
You went into that marriage with great optimism and hope that everything that you had been taught would come to fruition. I will love him, I will be a dutiful wife, and love will grow between us. But it didn't really work out that way. Can you talk a bit about that relationship and why it didn't work out?
Yeah, I really thought if I do everything they said I should do, right? Like I will sweep the corners of this house with so much intention and prayer. I will I'll go to the mikveh, I'll dunk in the pool every month. I will think about God all the time. I'll pray every day, and then my marriage would be beautiful and my children would be holy. And I tried that. It was hard. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl I had been in love with, and we didn't talk about this yet, but I had been in love with a girl at 19 at the point in time at which I married my husband. And that was not just a separate relationship from the high school one. I just couldn't seem to stop falling in love with girls. And I was essentially dating someone in secret and also without any language with which to talk about what we were experiencing. And we had a 6-month relationship. We went on vacation together. She snuck into my bedroom all the time at night. And when I got engaged, we started to slowly break up. And at my wedding, it was like we knew we couldn't be together. She was religious from the community as well, and she came to the wedding and just cried the entire time. But I said, I'm going to start new. Like, I'm getting married now, that's it, I'll just be with this man. I couldn't seem to stop thinking about her and feeling guilty for even having those thoughts. And also, the husband I married was he wasn't compatible with who I was. He was really rigid about all of the rules. It really bothered him that I was an independent thinker. I wanted to go to college. I wanted a PhD in psychology. And he forbade me. He said, he got his rabbi to say, you can do a master's in social work. And so I had to listen. That was what I was trained to do. And so I went ahead and attended Rutgers in New Jersey. We lived in Lakewood, New Jersey, so I'm very familiar with New Jersey. I attended Rutgers as a 20-year-old young woman in a long skirt, stockings, wedding ring, and a wig. That is not the usual vibe.
And you were not allowed to attend by yourself.
Right, and I had like a chaperone buddy, like this other religious woman that was in my carpool, and then another one, the rabbi's wife.
So can I?
And my friend just nudges me and is like, Mocha, you're pregnant, you shouldn't be here. This could go into your baby. And I was like, you're right. I really thought she was right, that I couldn't have access to this information because it would ruin my child. And so I asked the professor for permission to not watch the end of the film. I talked with her outside of the classroom and said, I'm so sorry, this is against my religious beliefs. And my daughter always says, she's like, Mom, maybe this is why I'm bi, because you left it in the film. What would have happened if you would have stayed to the end and watched it? But I'm so glad that she gets to say that now. Yeah.
So you're in sort of this loveless marriage, and in part because your husband is so much by the book, so much so that he doesn't want to basically look at you and talk to you for half of the month, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, so he was the kind of religious that took the rules to the nth degree. And he was extremely pious. So the rule was, and some of you may, the Jewish purity rules, that during the 2 weeks of a woman's period and the week after that, one should not have marital intercourse, don't have sex, basically, for those 2 weeks out of the month, immerse in a ritual bath, and then you may resume your intimate life. And then there are rules in Orthodox Judaism around that. So they say husbands and wives shouldn't sleep in the same bed during that time period, shouldn't touch each other, no cuddling. There are even some rules about don't pass a salt shaker to your spouse because your fingers may brush when you pass something like a salt shaker. So sexy, right? Passing the salt shaker. It's great now because I'm like, everything could be so erotic. I've been taught that. But he thought, to himself, what if, I guess he decided, what if he were to look at me during those 2 weeks and then feel temptation? And so he took it upon himself to not make eye contact with me at all. And he would just come in to dinner that I prepared and like to sort of look down, mumble at the table while I served him dinner and then just shuffle away. And so that was hard because I felt like I'm doing all these things for God and for this marriage. I'm doing everything I can, but I don't even have a person here with me. There's no one home, no one to talk to.
Divorce is remarkably frowned upon in your community, and particularly within the family, because then you become a shanda to the entire family,
Yes.
right? So you had a lot of pressure on you to stay in the marriage from your siblings and your father, right? But ultimately, you decide enough is enough. So how did that happen?
I'm so grateful that I did get to go to Rutgers, because they always said, like, be really careful when you are in the outside world so that you don't get influenced. But I still sort of got influenced because it's a super liberal campus. You know, they're talking all the time about like social justice, women's rights, and things like that. And I started to have these thoughts that maybe what was happening in my marriage was not okay, and that I didn't have to tolerate it. I felt like someone from like an ancient tribe that I learned about at school with like what I was enduring at home. I didn't feel like a free modern woman at all. And so I looked at my husband and my 2 young children, and I just knew in my gut I wanted more for them. I wanted more for my children than what I had. I didn't want them to grow up and have an empty, loveless marriage out of obligation and to feel stiff and like scared inside all of the time. My family, though, they really wanted me to stay married to my husband. Part of that, I will say, is because in the Orthodox community, we were trained to never talk about marital issues with anyone other than like a rabbi, a therapist, or a bride teacher. That was a special woman who did that. And so in their defense, my family's defense, they didn't know that there was a single problem in my marriage. Because the system is designed to keep people under control. That is how it is intentionally designed, so that if you're struggling, it's in silence. And so nobody knew, and when I said I want to divorce my husband, I mean, they were like, that was the first they had heard of any struggle at all. We looked like the perfect couple on the outside. And so they tried to work against me. And then there's a system of rabbis that also don't really like when women get divorced. And so they also work against women who want to get divorced. And so that's quite a process with like the get system in Orthodox communities.
So how did you get a get? Because of course you cannot decide unilaterally that I'm getting divorced in the community. Your husband has to grant this to you.
And so I got creative. I was 24, and the entire world was working against me. My own family, all of the rabbis I consulted with, they wanted me to take Prozac and stay. They were like, maybe you can take something like Prozac and stay married, you know, see this other therapist. And I was a social worker already, so I knew that like Prozac wasn't gonna do it. I had worked on an inpatient unit. I had too much information. That became a problem for them. Because I just would ask questions or just silently like think like this is not gonna work. And so I got creative, and I ended up meeting with my husband's parent, and I threatened them. I said, I really don't want to have to tell people that your son was abusive to me. Which I don't know what he did, met the definition of abuse, and I talk about this in my book because I want to be honest and be like, yes, I felt coerced into having sex. Was it him who coerced me, or the rabbis, or the system? You know, that's complicated. But I did make it sound to them like I would spread rumors about him, and that's the worst thing in the Orthodox community. You cannot have any rumors be spread about you, because then you're like your rest of your family wouldn't be able to get married, you wouldn't be able to get remarried, and so I was able to get divorced.
You know, I was thinking a lot about this husband and this relationship, because this is one scene where you're in bed, you're trying to have a baby with your husband. This is not a pleasurable thing. We're creating a baby. And you are saying prayers as this is happening, one prayer after another prayer. and you feel like it's my obligation, this is what I'm expected to do, this is what God wants. And I'm thinking about your husband, because there are times when you're not interested, but you say yes because it's your duty, and I'm thinking, but he also thinks it's his duty. Every time he has this urge, he's probably thinking, ding ding, this is God knocking at your door, go have a baby, right? So it's sort of it's an interesting situation.
Right, it really is, and I think that sometimes people miss that when they talk about Hasidic Judaism. It's that we miss having compassion for the men. You know, because it's not easy at all to be a man in that culture. They're told that they're the spiritual CEO of the household, essentially. But they have no training for that position. They've never lived with a woman before. They have to be in charge of everyone's spirituality in the household. How much pressure is that? I could barely be in charge of my own spirituality most days. You know, and so absolutely, I think, he must have been having his own dissociative difficult experience at that time.
You know, when we talked earlier, I said sometimes I interview authors and I think, how am I going to fill up the hour? And I'm looking at the clock and I'm already thinking, I said we could spend 3 days and I'm sure we won't. So I feel like we have to push things forward so we give people a chance to answer some questions. But in short, you get divorced, you move to Lakewood, and you're a single mom. So can you talk just a little bit about those years and how you ultimately came to become married again?
Yes, so I get divorced, I'm 24, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I wanted so badly to live this free life, and so I would, whenever I didn't have my children, sneak out of Lakewood and throw my wig in the back seat of the car, pull on jeans, swipe on some eyeliner, and go to Asbury Park, where the gays were, or Manhattan, or Atlantic City, and I just wanted to be like a young adult in the world. I dated some problematic people because I wasn't equipped to make the right choices at all. I dated one woman, felt too many emotions, and thought, this is really dangerous. I still can't be gay, because then that could become an issue. I had signed a custody agreement at that point in which I promised to raise my children as Orthodox. And the consequences were, if you don't raise them Orthodox, you will cede custody to the other biological parent. So I would be losing custody if anyone saw me in pants, or if I fell in love with a woman. And so those risks were too great, and I didn't want to allow myself to feel those things. And so I ended up dating men, and Jewish men, trying to really hard to create a future in which I could survive, as a human being, within the lifestyle I promised to live, so I could keep my children.
So can you talk a little bit about your second husband?
Yes.
Yes, he was more, he wasn't as tethered to the orthodoxy.
Yeah. So my second husband, Eli, is the name of the book. I met him through a mutual friend, and he was very loving. He was still Orthodox. I told him I had battled attraction to women as we were dating. And at this point, I'm wearing shorter skirts, and some of my hair is pulled out the front of my wig. And he wears a kippah, but also jeans. 5 towns Jew. So we lived in Lawrence when we got married. You can envision it, because I know you're in Hoboken, it's not that far from the life I've lived. And he really just fell in love with me, and we eventually decided to get married after about a year. And he accepted me. He knew who I was, and he knew the things I struggled with. He also, as an Orthodox man, didn't really believe that homosexuality existed. He also, along with myself, believed that it was a temptation to be overcome. So we both knew, I had this thing, I was working on it, I would overcome it, and we would still have a good life.
But he was very keen for you to get your PhD, for example.
Right, he supported me.
And he was keen for you to open a practice and help you in myriad ways in terms of growing as an individual.
He was so proud of me, and he was so loving, and he just wanted me to succeed. And I'm still so grateful to him because he did. He helped me get my PhD, and he ran a marketing company. So he taught me how to market myself as a therapist and to build my own practice on Long Island.
But ultimately,
he actually loved me into figuring out who I was, because I saw the way he looked at me and I thought, like, I wish I could look at somebody that way. I now knew what love was in the second marriage. And I sadly knew that I would never have that for a man. And I still kept falling in love with women. I still kept looking at women and wanting to just have connections with women as life happened and there was a loss in my family. I just kept wishing I could talk to somebody that I can really truly connect with. And so ultimately, we just broke each other's hearts, you know. Yeah.
And so you have your second divorce,
Yeah.
your family is freaking out.
Yes.
How hard is that to go against the wishes of your family and the community? Because the second time, let's face it, is a lot worse than the first, right, in some ways?
My sisters who helped to raise me were just they were throwing their hands up in the air. What are we gonna do? It's like to them it would be like watching someone relapse on heroin. They were just like, you're done. We can't enable you. You know, your second divorce. And they tried to talk me out of it. And they also just got kind of nasty with it at a point. They were trying so hard to control the situation. And, that's part of why the song earlier made me so emotional. Because in my upbringing, it was like, your children, you have to control their thoughts. If you're not trying to control their thoughts, their actions, and their hearts, what are you even doing? That's your job, to teach them to be godly beings, just like you were taught. And so their whole way of doing that was through control. And so when I wanted to get divorced for the second time, what they did at that point was call my colleagues, who were other trauma therapists, and tell them that I had lost my mind. And so that, I ended up having to cut off my relationship with them because of that. And they just couldn't handle it, And so at that point, I lost my husband, most of my community, and my family.
I mean, one great thing about your second husband is that he was relatively wealthy.
Yes.
Which, because you were trying to juggle, I'm a working mom, I've got two kids, right? And that was extremely helpful. Was that also hard to leave behind in terms of now I'm on my own again and I have to sort of figure out how to make it work?
Yeah, he also cooked. So, yeah. And he had the financial means. We lived in a mansion, what I felt like was a mansion, at least, coming from a simple home in Brooklyn, across from the country club in Lawrence. We had an in-ground pool. We had luxury cars in the driveway. We were a trophy couple. People would approach us at functions and ask us for donations, like that, I always had the perfect dress and heels. And then when I left him, of course I wasn't going to ask for anything because I felt so guilty, already having to break his heart. And I just left everything except my Peloton bike. I took that one piece of luxury with me. So I just wanted that. And I was a little bit in love with my Peloton instructor also. So I took the bike. But then I was poor again. I felt, or not poor again. I had a PhD, so I was okay-ish, but I was struggling with money again. And I had to think about making ends meet and supporting my children who are now used to this lifestyle. And we wanted to live this whole free life in New York City. And it was like I would lie awake in bed again at night and think, how am I going to afford this? How can I do this on my own? It's terrifying.
Can you talk a little bit about your practice? Because it really turns into quite a thing.
And so I needed to maintain this practice on Central Avenue in Cedarhurst in an Orthodox community, because otherwise, how was I going to afford my life? And so in order to do that, I had to pretend to be. At that point, I was when I left the marriage, I decided to be authentic, to date women, and to come out to myself as not really religious anymore. But I pretended every day, put the wig back on and the skirt back on to go to work so that I could just earn a living. I didn't want to lie or hide who I was, but I did have to in order to survive for a while.
Because if the parents of these children who you saw found out that you were not part of the community anymore, they would send their kids someplace else, presumably.
Part of when people called me to like book therapy sessions with me as a therapist in that neighborhood, they would say, okay, what are your approaches to treating trauma? I was famous for treating trauma, especially in young children. People would drive in from everywhere to see me. I spoke Yiddish, a little bit of Hebrew, and did play therapy, and was highly trained in treating trauma. So they would say, what is your expertise? And sometimes they would say, which shul do you daven in? Who's your rabbi? And they would look at my profile picture online and see the wig and the skirt. That was like, it was like 50-50. Both of those things were equally as important. And so I knew this could be a problem. Yeah.
Let's
And it was, yeah.
Let's talk about God.
Sure.
Okay, so throughout your life, all growing up, God is central. God is everything, right? I mean, all this control is trying to please God. At what point, if ever, do you maybe start to think, perhaps God made me this way for some purpose, or there is no God at all? So, like, how do you make that circle work in terms of who you are and God and what you've been told God wants of you?
I had thought for a long time that God wanted me to fight my attraction to women. And then the first Yom Kippur after I left my second husband, I fasted, but I couldn't do the prayers because the prayers I had were would have meant repenting for being gay and repenting for having any attraction to women. And there was a point in that Yom Kippur, like 6 p.m., when I decided to have a sip of water. And it wasn't because I really, really needed the water. It was because I thought, I don't believe in a God that wants me to repent for this. This cannot be it. That can't be it. And I didn't know what I believed in for a really long time. For a while, I thought I don't believe in a God at all. Because everything I've been told about God was so punishing and shaming and hard. But lately I've been having a more open-heartedness with it. Do you want me to bring it up to speed?
Sure.
I don't know. Firstly, when my book came out in June, this has been such a difficult time period to be a Jew in publishing. As you can imagine, so many Jewish authors have been their books have been like crushed before they hit the shelves. The people who supported me most were the Jewish community. I was invited to JCCs to speak at temples. I hadn't been in a temple in years. When I was invited to give my first book talk at Temple Beth Am in LA on Shavuot last year. And I was just welcomed with open arms into congregations with all gender restrooms like this one, where the rabbis were women. And I started to feel like, maybe there's another form of Judaism. I'm also sober now. I've been sober for a couple of years. And last night, actually, I was scrolling through AA meetings. There are ones that you can do online when you can't get to a meeting. And I was like, I should do a meeting. And there was an agnostic meeting available, and then another meeting. And it was the first time I felt like if I enter the agnostic meeting, I don't know if I'll fit in anymore. Because I have been feeling more and more of a God presence in my life. And I think now maybe God is a group of trans women. maybe God is all of us. But I don't anymore feel like that negativity.
Mm-hmm. How about your kids? You have your daughter, your Jordan. What is their sort of ongoing relationship with their biological father and Eli?
So, my kids are amazing. I have the most amazing kids in the world. They're so thoughtful and so well-spoken. And, they have been on this journey. We've talked about all these different things. So they're able to have a cordial relationship with their dad. They understand his limitations at points in terms of understanding his limitations and understanding the life that we are living. They've decided to be honest with him about who they are. They're not identifying as Orthodox Jews anymore either. And they've been able to maintain a connection. I'm really proud of them. But we're no longer connected with Eli because it just turned out to be too difficult for all of us. Yeah.
Understood. All right, well, I feel like I know, first of all, a lot of people have already read the book.
Oh.
So I know there are plenty of questions, so I feel like it's time to open it up. What are you folks interested in?
Yeah, and also I know some people, yes, ask anything. People sometimes are like, oh, you're this like doctor, therapist. We have to just, you don't have to be respectful.
You were about to make a point, and Adam took us on a different direction. You remember, it was a, and I was,
Oh, I don't
really
know.
interested, I don't remember the subject. But,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it had to do more with, no, never mind.
Go ahead, Charles.
I just turned 65 and
It'll come
you're
back.
escaping me.
So thank you, Dr. Glass. I have to thank memoirists for really laying their lives out with this. What I wanted to ask you about were the tattoos.
Yeah.
Because, just to fill everybody, you get a tattoo while you're still married to Eli. You're still in this Orthodox community. And that felt to me like, when I was reading it, like, what an incredible risk you're taking. Because you're still going to the mikvah. People are going to see this. So, understand that a little better, please.
I love the way this question is phrased. And if you follow me on Instagram at Dr. Sara Glass, that's where I talk the most about my life, and my kids are on there. You can see normally when I do book talks, I don't wear sleeves so you can see more tattoos, but it's cold.
I was wondering.
Yeah. So the decision to get tattoos, I think it's really interesting, to think about it as a trauma therapist. I think part of it was me reclaiming my own skin. It was like I felt like everything that had happened in my body, or so many things, were against my own gut and what felt right to me. And inking my body felt like a reclaiming. It felt like me saying, this does belong to me. And so my first tattoo, it brought me back home to myself so I could feel again. It helped me. And that almost helped me realize I needed to leave my marriage. Yeah. The one that you can see today is the neck one. I don't know if you can see.
Mhm.
I did a neck tattoo for my 40th birthday. I was like, I don't know if this is a midlife crisis or what, but yeah, I love that feeling of getting to reclaim. Yes.
I remember. You were talking about your practice, and then you were about to talk about how it changed.
Oh, yes. Okay, so this isn't a Modern Love podcast. If you follow Modern Love podcast, they did a podcast episode about the column I wrote about my first love at 15. And then in the episode, I talk about losing my practice on Long Island overnight when I was outed as gay. So what happened was a former client of mine found pictures of myself and my partner online by hacking into some accounts and disseminated them throughout the community. And I lost my practice overnight on Long Island. And I did that, all that did happen. Parents called me and said, we're so sorry, we love you, but we cannot have our children see you anymore. And so also that'll be covered in book 2. I'm working on book 2. It's not in this book because it's like after the end of this book, but I'm working on book 2, which is what happens after you leave an insular community. And it's all the sex, drugs, rock and roll, living in New York City and being highly traumatized and trying to come into some sort of alignment with myself and the world around me.
Audrey, I know you had a hand up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing, your very personal story. It's very humbling for someone to hear. And my question is, what motivated you to write the book? What do you hope to accomplish with it?
Thank you. What motivated me to write the book is all of the people who are still stuck inside of closets. I looked back and I saw my nieces being married off at 17 and 18 years old to people they barely knew. And I saw this happening to my clients and people I loved. And I thought I had to do something. There was no way for me to scream loud enough for anyone to hear, or to hear from within the community that I was saying on the outside, please, like, don't do this to your children. We don't know, like, let them think, let them feel, let them be. But I knew that story could change hearts. And I will say that since this book has been published, I get DMs on my social media, emails, every single week from people saying, thank you for writing this story. I'm 19 years old and about to be arranged married and I have a girlfriend. Or I'm 46 years old and I'm scared to come out. I'm from another culture, I'm Mormon, I'm Catholic, I've been closeted, you know. And so I know that story can change hearts.
What I would like to really know from your perspective as someone who is experimenting with interacting with the quote-unquote outside world, what can we, as members of that outside world, when we see people come into our spaces, we know they're experimenting, we know they're doing something that like they quote-unquote shouldn't be doing. When we see young girls in skirts, tights, and shadels and whatever it is, in our libraries, in our LGBTQ plus spaces, in places where we know that they're not supposed to be, what can we do to support, encourage, and just overall help in a way that's truly helpful for those people?
Thank you. That's such a great question. I'll answer with a couple of different points. One is, don't make assumptions. Someone may be like experimenting outside of the community and entering an LGBT space, but they may still feel very tied to the community they're in, and they may still believe in God, they may still want to marry someone of the opposite gender, and so don't assume, you know, that they're feeling oppressed or that they want to leave. Make sure you're like leaving space for the possibility that they want to stay, even though they're exploring. Two is, I would, if you can, like give them a lifeline, like your phone number and a reason to call you. Or, you know, access to resources if you're in conversation and it can come up naturally. And be kind. You know, the few people who were kind to me before I left the community meant everything to me. I thanked my hairdressers in my book, because when I went to the hair salon, I would have to pull out the wig and my hair and say, okay, I know this is weird, I wear a wig sometimes, my hair sometimes, can you make it match? And they were just loving. And they said, of course we can help you. And they listened to my story and understood I was wearing a wig sometimes and not the other times. And those were the only people at some point, like over the course of 6 months, who would hear me speak my truth. And so don't underestimate the power of your kindness, even just for a moment. And 3, if you can, and you want to, donate time or resources to Footsteps. They're so close to my heart. They're an organization that helps people who are trying to leave. Over half their members are queer at this point in time.
Go ahead.
I have 2 questions. First one, I didn't read the book yet, so did you come from a large family? And do you have contact with anyone in your family anymore?
That's usually the first question. So I'm surprised. I came from a family of 7. And so I had 6 siblings. And one passed away, and that story is in the book. I am in contact with my sister who passed her children. We're very close. She was like sort of the black sheep of the family, and I was like the charcoal sheep later on, and then I became the blackish sheep. And so we're very, very close. And I don't speak with the rest of my siblings anymore.
Okay, my second question, I'm glad you still have some family that you have contact with, is, and this is a strange one, but I know this has been done already, there have been some movie shows, whatever, but has anyone optioned your book?
No one has optioned my book, but if you want to, I'll never say no to any opportunities.
So you're in touch with your nieces and nephews from your one sister. What are they about? Are they still fully in the community, or are they?
So they're not Orthodox. My niece, Mickey, in the book, went to Brown. She's currently living in Israel. She'll be getting married this June. And my nephew He's Adam in the book. I change everyone's names, for their privacy. He actually lives with me part-time now. He's back and forth between his dad and me, and he's like always on the train, and he's in our home, so.
So is
we're very close.
is his dad not Orthodox either?
He's like orthoflex.
Okay.
Riverdale.
Like Riverdale, yeah, not quite 5 towns.
Right, he's a queer ally and just a lovely, supportive dad. We're lucky to be close.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in this book is that you experience 3 different Orthodox communities, right? You're in Borough Park,
Yeah.
you're in Lakewood, and you're in the 5 towns. So if I decided I want to become religious,
Where should I go?
yeah, I mean, I think, no, I'm curious about this. Which one do you think is best for sort of humans?
Like best food?
No. I mean, I'm always, as these people know, I'm always interested in the best food. No, but it's a bizarre question, but I'm sort of curious about that. Do you have a feeling about that? Like, that one of these worlds is sort of a world that is comfortable to live within? You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, if you're ultra-Orthodox and you buy in completely, I presume Borough Park is lovely and fantastic, right?
Yeah, I will say there are things I loved about each one.
Yeah.
And I tried to include that in the book as well. Borough Park was home to me. It was where I grew up. It was very easy for me to live in because I knew what the rules were and what the expectations were in some ways. I didn't have to adjust or modify like I do now. Still, when I'm in the outside world, I'm still thinking to myself, am I doing the right thing for this environment? But I didn't have to do that in Borough Park because we all were like Holocaust survivor children and grandchildren. We all had grandparents that kept extra slices of bread in the freezer. We all, we were similar in a way. And in Lakewood, there was a system of women that supported each other. It was a very Orthodox community. The men would learn all day, and the women watched each other's children and helped each other like observe things and had play dates and helped each other with wigs, and that was like warm in its own way. And the 5 towns had certain freedoms. We were able to be more modern and integrated with the world. And so it depends on, what people's values are, but I would say there are great places to exist in all of those communities for someone who feels aligned with those belief systems.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I'm curious what your reaction was when you started to see more of the world at what Jewish communities, like different synagogues, that there were LGBT synagogues, and how does that fit in? You spoke about it in your own life, but did you say, oh, there is a place for me in the Jewish world, that I don't have to leave it completely? Or were you raised thinking everybody who's not observant like I am, they're not even Jewish?
So, synagogue was hard for me. I remember taking the children to the synagogue the first time, we went to synagogue outside of the Orthodox community. It was in Atlantic Beach, and it was a more open synagogue, and the kids and I were just like, we just don't feel like we fit in here either. But we did find community in their schools. My children went to Heschel High School, and that's like a pluralistic Jewish high school in Manhattan, and they were just lovely to us. They were so kind to us, and it's truly pluralistic. So they accepted all kinds of Jews, and it allowed my children the opportunity to think, do we want to be egalitarian? Do we want to be, the meditation kind of Jews? Do we want to flirt with Orthodoxy for a day or two and do that minyan? Because there are so many minyans. And so we reconnected with Judaism through Heschel.
Can you tell me a little bit about your practice now, and where it is, and what type of patients that you see?
Yes, so I have a practice in Midtown Manhattan, and I currently see about half Jewish and half not Jewish, something like that. Patients, I get a lot of people who are struggling with feeling closeted within communities and feeling unsafe or unable to leave. Queer folks and just like that side. It's been a very tough couple of weeks for my trans clients. and it will be. And I get to do that kind of work now. I treat trauma as well, complex trauma and dissociation. I also run a team of clinicians who have been trained by me to work with cases like my own, and with the kinds of cases that come in through my social media.
Go ahead, James.
So another question is, the denouement of the book is this, when your first husband sues to get custody of the children. And I didn't quite understand how that actually played out, because your lawyer says that you won, but there's still this ruling from the Beit Din that you signed that would seem to indicate that they still have a claim on the children. So explain a little more.
Yes, it's like a good technical, and I thank you for reading. So what happened was in the Beit Din.
I was under the covers at that point. I was so scared.
Oh, I know. Thank you. I was so scared too. I remember I would just like shake in my living room at night because I just wanted so badly to get my kids to the city and to have this life with them. And there was a point where I had a lease on an apartment in the Upper West Side. I was about to move in, but it was like this house of cards. Like if I didn't win the court case and if they didn't get accepted to the right school and all these things didn't align perfectly, we would just have to stay where we were. It was just so risky and scary. But what happened was the Beit Din paperwork says that if you go to court, all of this is null and void. And that was put in to be used against me. If you, woman who we're unsure about, goes to court, you're in your own hands now. Like, none of this is here to protect you anymore. But it did protect me at the end of the day, because going to court, made that contract null and void.
First of all, as a Heschel parent, I'm so glad to, or a former Heschel parent, I'm glad to hear that it's been a good place for your families. I'm curious about changes over time in the process of leaving the Haredi community. As you were growing up, did you know of people who had left the Haredi community, and also how do you see the changes? I imagine it might be easier to leave now than in previous years, but I don't know if that's really true.
I could talk about that for 3 days. As I was growing up, I knew about people who left the community. I was told they were homeless, prostitutes, and drug addicts. That's what happened when you left. And that you couldn't survive in the outside world, that it was a world devoid of meaning and of protection and safety, and that you would just be like living in a box on the street when you left. And so when I did leave, what's the tricky part is I did develop an addiction, and that happens to so many people who leave the Orthodox community. You leave and you have no one, no safety net, so much trauma, and people often do struggle with addiction on the other side. And it's almost like they program you to believe that that's because the world outside is unsafe, not because they've raised you in such a way where it's hard for you to survive in the world outside. And so that's like a tricky sort of tactic, I think. So that was one of the ironies of leaving that I didn't expect. I thought I would be better then. I had a PhD. I was so privileged in leaving. I was able to afford an apartment in the city. Most of the people I know who leave the community can't. They haven't had access to education, and I was one of the most privileged ones. I still wasn't better then. I still struggled a lot. And I'll talk about that more in book 2, because I think it's important to be honest about things like this. That's why I write. And it is easier now for people to leave or to live a double life because of the internet. So they have much more access to information and resources than I had at that time.
Go ahead, Cashin.
First of all, thank you so much, and it's very moving, and I'm so grateful also to the synagogue and Adam the Rabbi for having a speaker like you here. And especially with what's going on, seeing, all gender bathrooms, that's really important. It's been a rough 2 weeks. But I'm just curious, since you published your book, or since you're on Instagram, where you're sort of out there in the world, have you ever heard from the girl you were in love with when you were 15 or when you were 19?
Yeah. I'm gonna defer defer that question because both of those people are still living within the Orthodox community. And so I'm just going to just like defer that one just out of respect for their families and their privacy. But I will say lots of people I have met over the course of my journey follow me on social media, and it's been fascinating to hear people reach out and say, like, I was in your class in high school, I remember you as Malka, this girl from Borough Park, and mostly supportive. They've been like, good for you, I'm so happy to see you happy. They try to fight you as you want to leave, but once you've left and they see that they have no influence over you, like the good-heartedness can come back out and the love can come back out.
All right, last one, go ahead, Dale.
I know you went to college, obviously you got a PhD. Did you feel like growing up though, that the education you received was adequate? Or did you feel like it had been really deficient once the time that you got out of the Orthodox educational system?
Okay, that's a really good last question. I don't know how many people have seen the New York Times expose on education in Hasidic yeshivas or a lack thereof. The education I received growing up was so insufficient, and the only reason why I made it through college is because I was fortunate enough not to have learning needs, and to have so much grit and determination, and I was able to make it through college. But for the reason I fought so hard to get my children out of the system was because of the education they were receiving in the community. That education would not have prepared them to choose colleges, to even attend college in any sort of functional manner. And it would not have prepared them to have choice in life in general. When you limit children's access to information and to the world around them, through limiting their educational system, what you're doing is curtailing their ability to imagine and to dream. And so the lack of education I received was so much more about not learning how to write a proper essay. It went way beyond that to me not developing the cognitive structures with which to imagine outside of the world I was shown. And that what happened was at 19, I just literally did not believe that the world outside was for me, because so much of my ability to imagine had been limited, and so I think that the education system in yeshivas is a serious human rights issue, and there are organizations like YAFED working to correct that, and they're saying, we're not trying to take children away from Orthodox Judaism, we just want them to be educated. Can we please teach them how to read and write so they can function in America?
Thank you so much, Dr. Sara Lang. Thank you for giving us your time, and thanks, Jordan, for joining us. And if anybody needs to pay for being here this morning, please find me after we're done. For the next 20 minutes or so, Dr. Sara is going to be in the back table signing books, schmoozing. If you have further questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me and for having such a nuanced conversation. I just really love this group. Like, everyone's just been so thoughtful with the questions. Thank you.
Our pleasure.